Are live. What's up, STS Nation? Welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor, the show that promises to bring you the best guests in all of true crime. And I say it every show, but this time, of course, is no exception. We're actually, to use the phrase of one of our guests, we are leveling up tonight. In this episode, we talk about the stunning turn of events with Bryan Kohberger's court-appointed public defender. Her name is Ann Taylor, and the incredible conflict of interest with Xana Kernodle's mother. Her name is Cara Northington. As you know, I like to start each show remembering all the victims. So let us never forget those young lives lost way too soon. Madison Mogen, 21. Kaylee Goncalves, 21. Xana Kernodle, 20, and Ethan Chapin, 20 years old. Let their memories all be a blessing. Now, we know that police say the killer is 28-year-old Bryan Christopher Kohberger. Got two lawyers, one the former attorney general and the former lieutenant governor of the great state of Idaho. So I need a disclaimer in here that we want to remind everyone that Bryan Kohberger is presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Our best guests break down the very latest. As I just mentioned, the dapper man in the suit, stepping up his game, is David Leroy. He's a trial lawyer with 5 decades of experience in preventing and solving problems for his clients. He has served, listen to this, as Ada County prosecuting attorney, Idaho attorney general, and was lieutenant governor of Idaho and United States nuclear waste negotiator. Currently, he is specializing in felony criminal defense cases. Please get your questions ready for this one-of-a-kind guest. The other one-of-a-kind guest. We have 2 one-of-a-kind guests. Tara Malik. She is an Idaho licensed attorney practicing in state and federal court in business and commercial litigation. She has experience in both civil and criminal law, previously working as the Kootenai County deputy prosecutor, and she is a graduate of the University of Arizona, where I met my wife, which is why I mention it, and also the University of Idaho College of Law. So we've got 2 Idahoans. Please don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Patreon, YouTube. As my 8-year-old daughter says, please subscribe and definitely smash that like button right now so we get the algorithm cooking. Without further ado, we talked about this, so don't yell at me. The former attorney general and lieutenant governor says I can call him Dave. So, Dave, your 360 bird's eye view of this case. Obviously, the murders happened back on November 13th. Some time has passed. I mean, how did this reverberate in your eyes throughout the state of Idaho?
Well, this is a unique case from several perspectives, and I have a unique perspective on this case in that I actually was in this home on the 2nd floor 4 years ago when Tara's husband and I were both running for Congress. The University of Idaho had its homecoming parade, and one of my strong supporters was a man who had a son who lived in that house with other tenants. After the parade, he and I went over to the King Street residence, sat around for about 40 minutes in the living room area there and chatted with the then residents of the house. So beginning from that intimate perspective, I guess my overarching observation would be that uncommonly here, more than almost any other case of which I'm aware in the entire judicial history, perhaps of the nation, this case has more victims than usual. First of all, it happened in such a bucolic, out-of-the-way, beautiful little agricultural college town where both Tara and I have done our degrees, law degrees in both our cases, my case, even an undergraduate degree. And the reason people send their children to the University of Idaho, as did my mother long ago, was it's a nice, beautiful, proper, safe place to go to learn whatever you're pursuing and be absolutely certain that your security will be unmolested by outside influences and forces. So when this startling crime, dreadful crime occurred, we had a victimization not merely of those families involved and those young people who sadly, tragically lost their lives early, but it victimized the university community. It victimized a small town and a county of about 44,000 people. It reflected very negatively and dramatically and sadly on the state of Idaho. It impacted not only those students who became 11,500 strong, each of them concerned with their own security, but obviously it infected and affected their parents with an uncertainty about the security of their children and the degree to which they ought to continue in such a community. Fortunately, after 6 weeks of intense work, the police were able to identify a suspect. But during that period, when there was no suspect, when the police were being savaged just a bit because of the lack of information they were putting out, but working very effectively in a teamwork behind the scenes, we were all very uncertain and concerned that this might become all too swiftly a cold case. So far more than most cases, far more than any case of which I'm aware anywhere in the country, having practiced law in New York City and all over the country in a former life, I would say that this case, with all of its victims at various levels, proceeds with national and some international attention. In fact, I had one of my acquaintances tell me that someone in Saudi Arabia had asked her about this case. This case has victimized people all over the world, and that's a sad, sad thing. But we are committed to an absolutely fair, constitutionally proper trial in this state of Idaho. In our small state, we have courtrooms available, judges available, and this case can be tried as swiftly as the participants, the prosecutor and the defense, want to go forward. So we look forward to an objective resolution of this dreadful set of facts.
And Tara, I mean, to Dave's point, this really, shocked Idaho. It shocked the nation. It shocked the world. That is a news cliche, but in this case, I don't think it is being, overused or overstated. And I did talk to a lot of people, men and women, who said, hey, I'm fearful now. I'm locking my door. What's the sense that you're getting now? This is not a legal question, obviously. Have some of the nerves kind of calmed down, been soothed? Are people feeling, I mean, obviously police think they have their man. There's all kinds of rumors that swirl. Maybe there's a defendant out there somewhere, a co-conspirator, et cetera, et cetera. But in general, do you feel like people are more at ease right now?
In a sense, yes, that someone is in custody and that we're moving forward. Obviously he's not been convicted of any crimes yet. That's what the court process is meant to do. But in other ways, you can't unring that bell of the trauma that occurred. And this crime in particular, and I think Dave is absolutely right, there were so many levels of individuals and communities that it affected, and it really shattered the sense of security for not only students, but parents and Idaho citizens. And I think part of that trauma and that shattered sense of security really was based around what is perceived on the outside as like the senselessness of this crime. The fact that it was random for all intents and purposes. We're not looking at like a husband-wife relationship, romantic relationship gotten wrong that we know of right now. But it's hard to unring that bell. It's hard to come back from that. And whereas people, I think before, especially in that community, would never have, if you had asked them, do you think, a heinous murder will occur in Moscow, Idaho? I bet 99% of the people would go, well, no. I mean, nothing like that's happened in years here. Certainly that has changed. It's brought within the realm of possibility the fact that we aren't safe. We do have to lock our doors. This could happen again. And I think it's going to be a lot of time to really come back from that and to reestablish in some form or another sense of security for these communities.
Dave, I'm listening. I'm always taking notes, so no one yell at me, please. Dave, you alluded to, the potential of a cold case here. Do you think that critics were too harsh on the Moscow PD? Everyone seemed to say, look, they're a small town police department. They don't know what they're doing. And apparently for some time, they were tracking their suspect, and it appears that they knew what they were doing all too well, and continue to this day to be conducting an investigation. Did they get a bad rap?
Well, in cases of uncertainty, it's always convenient, particularly in the broadcast medium, to fall back on a cliche. When the average number of homicides in a small town like Moscow is 0 per year, and when there hasn't been one since 2017 or 2015, and where the police are not telling you what they're doing and they're not showing you linear progress that we would typically consider moving toward a quick solution, it's easy to assume that incompetence must be the rule. And of course, there are a lot of people and a lot of ways that you can second guess and suggest better methods about what might be said at a press conference or what might not be said at a press conference. But what came together well here was, in addition to an extra $1 million of state money put out by the state of Idaho to help Latah County, the county in which Moscow is located, go forward with any extraordinary expenses, and there certainly are, and I'm sure will continue to be more. They put together a very effective team quickly of the FBI agents from several different field offices and the laboratory back east, Idaho State Police, our laboratory, and state police investigators. The detectives in Moscow PD were obviously up to the task. They properly preserved the scene, and then to avoid giving any hint to a suspect in evolution, went dark. And during that period, they were obviously unfairly challenged by what they're doing or what they're supposedly not doing. On the other hand, among the sharpest of the critics, predictably and not so unfairly, were the parents of the victims, who were very concerned about not hearing privately nor observing publicly at the press conferences this linear progress that everybody hoped for. To the parents' credits, they have subsequently complimented the Moscow PD for what turned out to be a very productive, very methodical, scientifically driven 6-week investigation that led to the suspect that we have before the bar now.
And Dave, you said you're an alumnus of the university. Does this university eventually heal, or does it stay scarred in perpetuity?
Well, it has a new overlay of notoriety, and as Tara said, things are different to some extent. But I think the University of Idaho will continue to thrive, and I think the university has very quickly, very ably, under President Scott Green and all the relevant personnel involved in these kinds of things, done exactly the right things that you would want to do in a communications crisis, that you would want to do to be empathetic about your students, namely let them go home early, tell them to check in by video if they would prefer that and feel safer. They've increased campus security patrols, which I presume are perhaps less than the absolutely heightened extent they were during that period of uncertainty, but still increased. And all of the kinds of psychological supports, academic supports, sympathetic and empathetic supports that the university can do, the University of Idaho has done very well. I don't think the institution is damaged in the long term. It's certainly on a higher identified track as its existence in a small upstate area of a far western state. The negatives will attend, but so also I think will these positives ultimately prevail in terms of the university's own population and perhaps winning some new students when the word gets out that things are resolved, safe, and sensitively done by the university administration.
And, we're coming up on 3 months, still have a couple of weeks since the murders occurred. And there is still just a tremendous amount of interest in this case, and likely will be, all the way through the trial, with the next hearing set to start June 26th. But the news of the day is really about the Kootenai County Public Defender, Ann Taylor. Before we even get started, I should ask you, Tara, do you know her? Because you used to work in the county, and what are your professional thoughts on her?
I did work with Ann Taylor while she was at the county. She was, on the defense side while I was a prosecutor. So we weren't on the same sides, but we did work together on a few cases. I don't recall a lot of them, but I think Ann is an incredibly capable defense attorney. I think that she's very intelligent. I think she's very strategic. I think that she is very capable of handling this case. And so I'm not surprised, especially, there's a very small number of attorneys in the state of Idaho who are death penalty certified. So to take a case that could have a death penalty, where the state moves for death penalty, and she's one of them. And so, and in North Idaho, as the public defender, I believe that she is the logical individual who would step in on this type of case and take it. So I have no questions about her capability as an attorney handling this case.
And so Chico's mummy, who's a friend of the show and comments quite often, she kind of leads us into the news of the moment. She writes, "Until I hear a response from Ann Taylor, I'm not willing to believe she was just dropped with no alternative about what to do." So on, I believe it was January 5th, when Bryan had his first court date, on that very day, Ann Taylor, who is the chief of the Kootenai County Public Defender's Office, withdrew from Cara Northington's case. Cara Northington is best known now for being Xana Kernodle's mother. Dave, back to you as the one-time chief law enforcement officer for the great state of Idaho. What did you make of this conflict that the public defender in Kootenai County was set or already representing Xana Kernodle's mother, but took the case with Bryan Kohberger to represent him as well?
Well, I'm not of the mind that there's any irresolvable conflict here. Two of our ethics rules for the Idaho State Bar come into play. Those rules are promulgated by the Idaho Supreme Court, which licenses all of us Idaho lawyers, and we must faithfully adhere to those rules, not only to keep our license, but obviously to accord our clients the kind of representation that is promised by a lawyer representation. The ethics rules that come into play are two. Number one, responsibilities to a current client, and number two, responsibilities to a past client. In the case that you asked about, the past client is obligated, and the lawyer is obligated to have a relationship that's effective and doesn't damage any ongoing activity or any future activity of a lawyer's former case. I'm not particularly well advised, and perhaps Tara is, about what the challenges are or what the charges are in terms of the ongoing Kootenai County case by the mother involved here. But I would presume that the mere changing of lawyers in that case, regardless of exactly what stage it is, unless it's a week before some jury trial, which is complex in its nature and a new lawyer can't scrub in, I'm presuming that there's no harm or damage suffered by the changing of lawyers in that case, which happens all the time and which happens with great frequency in multi-lawyer offices, such as a public defender's office in an urban county, as Kootenai is in our state. So as to an obligation to a former client, I'm not seeing likely or predicting directly that there's any particular damage or impairment there that would give either the Supreme Court any problems or the lawyer any difficulty in going another direction. Obligations as to a current client, in the case of the defendant and the homicide case, needs to be handled very carefully. First of all, that former relationship needs to be disclosed to the new defendant. It needs to be explained to the new defendant. And to that new defendant, the lawyer owes an absolutely zealous and unimpaired independent judgment and asserting most aggressively and appropriately the claims of defense in the new case. Assuming that can be done, and assuming the new client is advised of that, and preferably agrees in writing that they would wish the new relationship to go forward, then again, there's no conflict there. So with all due respect to the adjectives and adverbs that you used in the initial observation that this might be a part of our program, I don't necessarily agree that there's any difficulty or conflict there, assuming proper steps are had, assuming the old case is properly advocated by a new lawyer stepping in, and assuming this new defendant signs off in writing that he wishes the old public defender to be his current lawyer in the new case.
And to that point, T. Hang, who I think joins us from Mexico, writes, I've been watching different lawyers cover Ann Taylor, and some lawyers say there was a conflict of interest, while some lawyers say that they see nothing wrong. Personally, I see something wrong. What is your take, Tara? Is this a conflict of interest? Did she do the right thing by withdrawing from handling Xana's mother's case?
I think that from the outside, it's easy to jump to a quick conclusion. But the reality is that conflict of interest evaluations under our ethical rules, or the ethical rules of every state, because they all have them, is really fact intensive. And the bottom line, especially in a case like this, is there anything that would affect the independent judgment of this attorney or the loyalty of this attorney to their client? And that really is central to a case. And so the evaluation that Ann is going to have to do, or has done, and I'm sure conferred with her client about, is how does that relationship or her prior representation of Xana's mother affect, or how could it potentially affect her obligations and duties under the rules of ethics here in this case. Now, I'll tell you that my personal opinion, sitting on, former prosecutor side, I don't like seeing that, because to me, it creates a potential for an appeal issue. So if this goes up on appeal and let's say there is a conviction that comes down, is he going to try and use this situation or this perceived conflict of interest as a basis or grounds to overturn a conviction? So, I'm a bit of a pessimist when it comes to this, and I'm always looking for, okay, where's our final solution? Where are we going? What's the potential? Because as any attorney knows, you're not just trying the case right then and there, right? You're looking forward to, how do I make sure that whatever conviction I receive, if I do receive one, is on solid ground? What are the holes and what are the missteps which could result in something like this being overturned? And with a case that has the potential to become a death penalty case, I think the risk is a lot higher.
Which is precisely why I said, get this waiver in writing, file it in a sealed fashion with the court, serve a copy on the prosecutor, make sure everybody's comfortable right now with going forward, and it's not being deemed to be a conflict as to the new client.
So Cara Worthington, she did speak to Ashley Banfield, to give full credit as a former journalist. I like to do that. She spoke to Cara Worthington on News Nation. Cara said to her, and this is a quote, I am heartbroken because I trusted her, meaning Ann Taylor. She pretended, she says, that she was wanting to help me, and to find out that she's representing him, meaning Kohberger. I can't even convey how betrayed I feel. Dave, you got to empathize a little bit. She's been through so much. She's having a drug addiction issue as we speak, I believe. Do you feel for her?
Oh, absolutely. And Tara was absolutely right. These are fact-driven matters. And so each of the participants involved needs to dig down and make sure that they have independently analyzed their duties of loyalty, their duties of empathy and sympathy. But when it comes to conflict of interest, that's a narrow subset It doesn't always include all of the empathy and sympathy that some might assume from the outside. I understand very deeply the hurt that mom must feel about that switch of roles. But this is a switch of roles where if new counsel can adequately and fully represent mom in the drug cases, and if the new defendant in the homicide case has a lawyer that can zealously and independently represent him, while there are sympathies and empathies involved, there's no conflict of interest here, assuming everything is correctly done and, in my opinion, correctly recorded before the court in a sealed fashion.
We need to get Steve Cohen, our erudite producer, on this, because it appears that Dave Leroy is breaking news here, saying that there is no conflict of interest and there's no better person to ask than the former lieutenant governor and the attorney general of Idaho. Leone, if I'm reading that correctly, if I was one of the parents, I'd be very uncomfortable with Ann Taylor having represented Xana's mom first. It seems like a conflict of interest. What about that aspect? Do you think, Tara, the parents, the victim's parents, would have an issue with this?
Oh, yes. I mean, from an emotional place, after having gone through what they've been going through, and, the criminal justice system, I will say, for all the good things that it does, one of the bad things and one of the realities is it can re-victimize victims. And in this case, the family is part of that circle. And so to have to go through and sit through a court process and observe all of these things that are going on, and then you add in the trauma that they've already suffered by losing their children, and now this piece about, one of the attorneys having represented for a moment in time one of the victim's mothers, I think it would be really strange and unnatural to not feel uncomfortable by that situation. But as Dave explained, and I completely agree, feeling uncomfortable and whether it's a conflict of interest are two very separate things. I mean, under the rules of professional conduct.
And the final call on this really will be and should be Mr. Kohberger's. When presented with the issue, it is his issue in the murder case and his obligation, his duty, his right to have an absolutely zealous and unimpaired lawyer go forward for him. If he believes that Ms. Taylor is that, then he can make that call. If he is in any way uncomfortable, she will probably not be his lawyer.
So he's the linchpin in all this. If he decides he's it's not Xana's family, it's not Cara. You're saying it's Bryan Kohberger who ultimately will have to decide if he would like to continue with Miss Taylor or not, correct?
In the scenario I raise, under our rules, such a conflict should be addressed and covered in writing, and to prevent the appeals or the concerns that Tara is concerned about as a prosecutor or a and to in-build issues for a defense lawyer, this issue needs to be nailed. It needs to be pinned down now, and the right way to do that, per our rules, is in writing and with Mr. Kohberger's signature one way or another on that sheet of paper.
Dave, neither here nor there. I'm just wondering, after these murders on the 13th of November, did anyone reach out to you within the state of Idaho to get your advice or opinion on how to move forward? Can you tell us that?
No, I can't tell you that.
Okay. I'll take that as a maybe. This next comment comes from LS. It doesn't matter if anyone has made mistakes, speaking of Cara. Their children were murdered, period. They deserve all the support and respect we can give them. Tara, I assume you agree with that assessment. Apparently, Cara did not show up to court. Some people are saying, well, she was on the run. I don't think she was on the run. She was just delinquent for a court hearing. But to the same point I raised with Dave, should there be a level of empathy toward this woman for all she's been through in the last couple months?
Of course. I mean, I think on a very basic human level, of course, she deserves empathy and certainly some grace, having gone through what she went through, having been affected and touched by these crimes, I think absolutely she deserves empathy. Now, we still have rules and we still have a court process, and we still have, if she missed an appearance, I'm sure the court will be inquiring as to why that was missed. And, but explainable in a situation like this, especially given the trauma that she has just gone through and experienced. I think anyone who has ever had any sort of trauma in their life can relate that you may not be as with it. You may not be as aware, or you may not be keeping up with the details of time and place for events as you would be without that trauma having occurred. So, we'll have to see what the explanation is there, but I would be surprised if she was running away or trying to escape some sort of court hearing, especially in light of the surrounding circumstances here.
And just for all of you who are tuning in, who are saying, who is this woman, Tara? She is a attorney out of the great state of Idaho, no relation at all to Xana Kernodle. We are talking about Xana's mother, Cara Northington, but Tara has no relationship, because I keep seeing some comments moving along the side of the screen here. So she went on to say, Cara Northington, to Ashley Banfield, I don't understand how she could do this, meaning Ann Taylor. I don't understand what happens now. Does she still have power of attorney? She did have a power of attorney, I imagine. Again, I watched her last night, and I decided to do the show today because there's still such an interest in this. But it also bothered me a little bit. Just seeing Xana's mother in the state that she's in right now. She's just been through so much. And, I personally wish her well. Dave, back to this this is something else that's just come up, as a sort of collateral damage from this case. And Rambo was real as the commenter. It amazes me how many people didn't lock their doors in that town. I live in a big city, and there's no way I would leave without locking my door. Seems like common sense. I mean, Idaho, like you said, it's a very bucolic place, especially Moscow. Did it surprise you, having gone to school there, that people were sort of so lax with security? And do you think people will change their tune now, or is that just the nature of a college town?
Well, I think it's dangerous to generalize, and I'm not willing to assume that there were more unlocked doors in town than there were locked doors. But in these community living situations where, excuse me, where a lot of students are coming and going, it's not uncommon to have community doors unlocked. We heard a bunch about this being a party house. There were at least 4 people living there. I guess there was some kind of locking system that had a punch key to it, both perhaps external and internal. But it doesn't surprise me that in residences, apartment buildings, places where many people were coming and going, it was more common than not to leave doors unlocked. On the other hand, we should not give the impression that Idaho is utterly immune to criminal activity, that property crimes don't occur here, even though this horrendous crime was utterly atypical and unprecedented in our entire state history, in my opinion. But we're reasonably prudent about safety, and I think our students are on campus. But in this particular area and this kind of housing, perhaps unlocked doors would be more normal than otherwise.
I grew up in suburban New Jersey. We never locked our doors, but I grew up in the 80s, and it's a different time now. So Ann Taylor defended Cara 4 times previously over drug charges. The most recent one, just to give you guys a little lay of the land here, was on November 19th. And that was just 6 days after the now infamous quadruple homicide. She claims, Cara does, that she found out about this switch or being dropped through a friend on social media. Tara, does that surprise you that you would find out that way?
Yes, very much so. Normally, if an attorney discovers a conflict of interest, there is a call to that client ahead of any sort of filing in court. The reality is that conflicts of interest do arise sometimes mid-case. Something happens, you discover a fact, and you're conflicted out. But I would be absolutely shocked if there hadn't been some contact with her prior to, seeing it on social media, or, it being out in public, or even the substitution of counsel being filed with the court.
This next comment here kind of deviates from the subject at hand, but Sticker Shock writes, and Dave, I'm going to ask you about this. Everyone reacts differently to stressful situations. People freeze and tell themselves it's not real. It's a coping mechanism. This person is talking about one of the surviving victims, DM. Just in your 5 decades of experience in law and being around, I'm sure other brutal cases, how difficult is this on surviving victims? Any way to relay what DM is going through currently? I mean, I know you're not in her shoes, but just to give people who are watching a glimpse into that side of it.
Well, if this case goes to trial, we'll get more particularized detail about what happened, how this young woman felt, why a retreat to the bedroom was made, why no call was made for several hours, if indeed she was involved in subsequently calling in the homicide scene. There is very little way to predict the normalcy in horrendous situations. And I think particularly a young woman of a vulnerable age with a shocking set of circumstances, not knowing entirely what was going on, but having some concerns about an intruder of very alarming appearance. I don't think anybody could or would or should second guess anything about that circumstance at this point. I've been on several national shows. The psychologists have kicked this around just a bit, and all of them come back to a young woman may indeed act exactly like we presume that she did. But until we hear her story, perhaps in a courtroom or otherwise someday on a made-for-TV movie, we'll never know how normal for her this additional victim's reaction was.
Corinna just told us, the comment is not up, but on the side here, that she is in Austria and this story is on the news quite often there, just to show you the global reach. Beth Joy writes, Ann Taylor stays in, which is, I think, which way, that's the way that Dave, I believe, is leaning. Big Baller over here writes, everyone's wondering about the 8 hours. The real mystery is why friends and sorority members were called hours before police. Again, in no way do we want to beat up on the surviving victims, but Tara, just wondering now with some time having passed, if you pondered this question yourself.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of questions in this case. And I think, when we have a shocking situation or a traumatic situation, certainly to this level, it's hard to predict, as Dave was describing, it's hard to predict how you would act and what you would do. These individuals who are in the house, the young lady who's still in the house, the roommate, no one knows how they're going to react in a situation like this. And from what I recall, even the seasoned police officers who are part of going and canvassing and closing off this crime scene had described it as one of the worst that they have ever seen. And these are seasoned officers. And to lay judgment on how she reacted and who she called in that period of time without knowing the details and jumping to conclusions, I think is wholly unfair. I think that she was probably taking actions that, was trying to help her create some sort of safety or security and backup, quite frankly, to have someone with her that, could be there for emotional support. So we don't know. We need to hear more, but I really don't think that it is fair for any of us at this point in time, certainly without hearing her side of the story to jump to conclusions or to lay any judgment at her feet for what she did after she discovered this crime.
She did say, Cara said some beautiful things about her daughter. Speaking about Xana, she said she was tough, she was strong, she was funny. She just had a quirkiness about her that not a lot of people possess, that kind of talent to be able to light up a room. I mean, Dave, you've been around handling law cases for 5 decades. These people were just starting out their lives. So much potential lost, right?
Horrendous tragedy. And all of the lives that they in turn could have affected, the children they could have had, the impression they might have made in a chosen profession. It's a tragedy of dramatic proportions, unspeakable proportions, truly so.
Mega truth here. Ann Taylor was assigned to Bryan Kohberger by a judge. One would think the judge would know if there was any conflict that could result in an eventual appeal. Dave, back to you. Does mega truth make some truth here?
Well, I think what we ought to do is flip this once again to Tara, because a point she made obviously has not sunk in as much as it should have. And that, Tara, since you're the best of the best viewers or guests on this program for viewers, repeat your point about how few death qualified public defenders there are in Idaho, and how important it is that that kind of unique lawyer be assigned to this case. That is a very significant fact that needs to be perceived by the public in this matter.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, in order to take a death penalty case, there is a very precise and exacting procedure you have to go through. You have to be certified and go through a process to become certified to handle death penalty cases. And not all attorneys and defense attorneys are death penalty certified. And Ann Taylor is one of very few. I think there's about 15 in the state, all of the state of Idaho, who are death penalty certified. So number one, we have an issue of how many are there out, in Idaho to begin with. But number two, to Mega Truth's question about should the judge know? No. I mean, in certain instances, of course, the judge, if it's plain as day, they could see it. There's a conflict of interest, but a judge is not going to know every single case that Ann Taylor is handling, especially outside of the county in which we're talking about. Moscow is in Latah County. Ann Taylor is housed out of the Public Defender's Office, Kootenai County Public Defender's Office, which is up in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. And that's about an hour and a half away. That's in a different county. She handles a tremendous amount of cases, I'm sure, as all public defenders do. And so to expect a judge to comb through every single case that Ann has appeared on to try and figure out whether there's a conflict of interest really isn't realistic at all.
And out of those 15 death qualified lawyers in Idaho, I would predict that no more than 5 or 7 of them are public defenders, and that no more than 2 or 3 of those are in the general region of North Idaho where this case is located.
And Dave, do you think that'll change now? Will there be more death penalty certified public defenders moving forward now?
Well, we do not automatically have in every homicide case a death penalty requested by the prosecutor, allowed by the judge. And so I don't think there's going to be any boom in lawyers seeking that unique qualification. But we will have a bill pending before the Idaho legislature this year to talk about financing and restructuring our public defense system in Idaho. It works very well, but we do have some implications for property taxpayers when we're funding it on a county by county basis. So we're looking at that system constantly. And certainly this particular issue that we're discussing today highlights the need for public defenders with this authority when these unique cases come up. And we have 44 different counties in Idaho, each of them with our own public defender system currently.
This next comment comes from Tony Gould, and Tara, I'll throw this to you, and I think I know the answer, but I'm a ex-TV news guy, not a lawyer, which is why I'm throwing it to you. To what extent can public defenders choose their cases? My understanding was that Ann Taylor was appointed to represent Kohberger. Cara W. Will continue to get public defender services. Can a public defender choose their case?
Well, each public defender's office is a little bit different. Ann Taylor is the head or the chief public defender. Normally, there's a procedure within that office about how cases are delegated out. But the public defender's office exists to provide public defense at no cost to the individual, the accused. In this case, yes, Cara, if she qualifies for public defender services still, she's still going to have representation. It's just going to be through a conflict public defender. And what happens there is that there are contracts, conflict public defender contracts with different law firms or individuals throughout the community. And when the public defender's office has a conflict, a case then moves to a conflict public defender who takes it. Now, that conflict public defender may be, an attorney that's not within the public defender's office, but it's at no cost still to the individual who is facing the legal claims against them. So, as far as choosing, the public defender's office can't just kick a case out and say, well, we're not really into this one, so we're not going to take it. That's not a luxury, as I'm sure Dave will talk about with his experience. That's not a luxury that they have. That's their job. They are to take those cases. But if, like in this situation, if there's a conflict of interest or if there's some other issue that prevents them from providing a good defense and a competent defense, then at that point in time, yes, they would take some moves to get it out of the office and to another attorney.
Dave has been so generous with his time, and I know I'm pushing my luck, but Dave, if you need to jump off, we'll stay on a little bit longer. But with that said, I'd love for you to stay as long as you can.
I'll drop off at the top of the hour.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you so much. So you see the comments keep coming in here, and the opinions are going to go in both directions. Love Wins writes, keeping Ann Taylor on as this quadruple murder suspect's court-appointed attorney would be an injustice to the victims and their families. But you're hearing here from the former top law enforcement officer in the state that this conflict can potentially be worked out. Dave, back to you about this. Has been in the news a little bit. I'm curious to get your take on this. So Bryan Kohberger reportedly applied for an internship at the Pullman, Washington Police Department, which is just over the state border. The New York Times actually got this correspondence with the subject line, "Thank you." And he wrote, Kohberger, Chief Jenkins, it was a great pleasure to meet with you today and share my thoughts and excitement regarding the research assistantship for public safety. I look forward to hearing from you. And Chief Jenkins responded in the email just moments later saying, great to meet and talk with you as well. How eerie is that exchange, knowing what we know now?
Well, once again, there are so many touches, connections in a small community like the Moscow, Pullman, Washington, Idaho area. The internship programs in our areas adjacent to universities are of great mutual advantage, typically to both the students and the entities that employ those internships. They're encouraged, they're useful, they give a practical side to course learning, and they act as an extension of the public servants or others that are getting those interns. So it's not surprising that a criminal justice student at Washington State University would seek out an internship at the Pullman PD, nor that Pullman PD would try to involve those students, perhaps even as a recruiting device ultimately, to get them into law enforcement or even that particular office. So the fact that this exchange took place is not remarkable at all. The fact that this particular person was involved in that exchange some relatively few weeks before he became charged with this crime is unusual and in some respects concerning in that perhaps he would have abused that office or perhaps it would have deterred him from crime. It's a speculation that nobody can resolve, I suppose. But the existence of internships in our college and university towns is a great value, generally speaking.
It's time to make Dave blush. Shivani writes, Mr. Leroy is the experienced voice of reason, followed by exactly. Really like this guest. Give Tara some love. She's very wise, very, very wise, and a phenomenal attorney.
I wish those people would call my wife and encourage that result.
Same on my end. Sticker Shock here writes, to Dave's point, there are a lot of things that can go wrong or right, I guess. We're at the beginning of this case, not the end. This is a marathon. I mean, Tara, to that point, there was talk. The next hearing is supposed to be June 26th. Maybe you can explain it once again, because I'm not an attorney, but the prosecution has the right to, I think, convene some sort of grand jury to try to move that hearing up. Am I recollecting this correctly? And do you think they will try to do that?
Yeah. So, what our next court hearing is in this case is the preliminary hearing. So that hearing in any felony case occurs at the beginning stages of the case. And what it is meant to do is it provides a first hurdle, I would say, for the state to prove their case on a more likely than not basis. So at the hearing, the state has to put on enough evidence to convince the judge that a crime was committed and that it was this individual on a more likely than not basis, so 51%, who committed the crime. Now, if the state is able to meet that burden, then the case moves forward and it goes from the magistrate court, which is where it is right now, to the district court, gets what's called bound over to district court. And that's where Bryan Kohberger will have to enter his plea of guilty or not guilty. He'll be formally read the charges against him, and there will be an indictment or an information that's filed against him. And from then forward, both sides are going to start getting into very intensive discovery exchanges of information. This is the point in time that they're going to be gathering their experts on each side, gathering expert reports to exchange between them. And that's how the case kind of proceeds forward. But the comment about this is a marathon is absolutely true, especially in a case like this where the stakes are high. It is certainly going to be a marathon because both sides are going to be working really hard and diligently to make sure that every move that they make is the right move here.
365 Jive, I love that name, writes, and Dave, this is for you. This is more of a philosophical legal question here, but I like it. The more I understand how quickly people rush to judgment without first attempting to find the truth, the more terrifying this world becomes. Thanks for sticking to the facts. Greetings from Florida. I'm in Florida too. Thank you. What kind of cautionary tale can you provide, and especially in a case like this where there's so many cyber sleuths, so much speculation swirling around, so much rumor mongering? What do you say to people about following the evidence and the facts as it pertains to the law and the judicial system?
Well, the rule of law is under assault from all kinds of quarters in our nation, politicians and the media, et cetera, et cetera. But in terms of following the procedure, in terms of the presumption of innocence, it's an absolute commitment to us here in Idaho, the lawyers, the judges, the police officers, the prosecutors, the defense lawyers, that this will be a fair trial. This will be by the book. And the earliest indications you've seen are that we're willing to occasionally take some criticism or a hit to follow proper procedure. The Moscow police and their investigation is a good example of that. The judge and the non-dissemination orders, subject to some criticism by at least 22 media outlets now, is an example of that. The fact that we have a date set by mutual consent almost 6 months out for the next public hearing, during which a lot of this discovery process that Tara has outlined will be taking place on both sides, shows you that this we are committed to being a presumption of innocence by the book, a legitimate and proper procedure kind of a case, even though it has all of these notorious and unusual human sides to it and all of the empathies and sympathies that we've talked about. So I am most hopeful that as to every aspect of this case, we will go forward in constitutionally correct procedure, that we will let the facts speak for themselves, that the defense will have a full and righteous opportunity to contest any piece of scientific evidence or cross-examine any witness it chooses to, and deliver a just verdict in this case, whatever that might be. Of course, in the meantime, while the public organs are silenced and not speaking, we'll get a lot of speculations, and the media will do a lot of legitimate work in terms of finding this or revealing that. The case will stay alive, but hopefully at a lower profile, and hopefully with accurate materials rather than inaccurate materials coming forth. But the obligation next that we'll have, should this man be bound over to district court using the procedures and the burden of proof that Tara has outlined, the next big challenge will be, can we find, and how do we find, and how will we best be able to find an objective set of jurors who can fairly decide this case solely upon the evidence they hear in the courtroom if it goes to trial. We'll get there, and we'll do that if necessary.
Dave, since I know you just have about 3 minutes left, I'm going to squeeze out one last question. This one comes from Laney. This has come up a few times in the side chat. Are blood alcohol tests given to murder witnesses who may later become suspects? And no one is saying that that is remotely the case here. There's no evidence or indication of that. But in events like the Idaho 4, wondering if DM's state of mind could be called into question if this goes to trial. Do we know if the surviving roommates were tested for any reason? Is there any kind of SOP?
I know of no fact that raises any kind of speculation of that nature. Obviously, officers would be making acute, time-sensitive observations if some issue related to an impairment or of ability to observe might have been detected. I would expect that to be duly recorded, but nothing about that seems to be an issue at this point.
And Dave, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I will. Do you think this case ends up going to trial? And just your final thoughts before you have to run.
I don't have any basis to assume any particular direction for this case. It will play out slowly. It will play out by virtue of the defense's legitimate options and aggressive exploration of the facts. It'll play out in terms of the prosecutor's determination whether or not to seek the death penalty and their obligation or their opportunity to amend the complaints and amend the informations if new evidence occurs. So it's much too early in this process to predict an exact track for this case, an exact timeline for this case, or certainly any particular result in this case where the defendant is presumed innocent.
Thank you so much. You guys just got a special treat. Dave Leroy, the former lieutenant governor of the great state of Idaho, also the former attorney general, the top law enforcement officer in that state. Why we have the very best guest in all of true crime. Thanks so much, Dave.
Thank you for the honorific, but it's been an honor to be your second best guest on this program.
That might be true. Thank you.
It is.
Tara, can you hang on for a few minutes and take some
Sure.
more? Okay, awesome. So this next one comes from Lou Lamaracco. Joel and Taylor also dropped Maddie's stepmother, Corey Lynn, from a case. Conflict of interest, to say the least. I had heard that. I had never had that confirmed. Do you know, Tara, not to put you on the spot, but I am, is that in fact true? And does that build a greater potential conflict of interest, in your opinion?
You know, I have to claim ignorance on this one. I don't know whether that's true or not. I haven't seen that or done any research on that issue. You know, I think the bottom line is, if it were me, would I do it? No, I wouldn't. I would have some grave concerns about a conflict of interest here. But again, you know, these are very fact-intensive inquiries. And, you know, I am sure, well, I shouldn't say I'm sure, but we have with the Idaho State Bar, as most bars do, an attorney or attorneys who job really is to answer ethics questions when there is an ethical question on things like conflict of interest for lawyers. So lawyers can pick up the phone, call bar counsel and ask and say, hey, here's my situation. What do you think? Do you think that this is or is not a conflict of interest? Now, I don't know whether Anne has done that or not. I would suspect she probably has done that. But that's another resource that attorneys do use and use it frequently, especially in cases where it's a gray area or there is a concern and they're just not particularly sure about how best to proceed forward.
Lisa Pritchard, I live in Australia. I have window locks, a ring system, and have my doors locked even when I'm home during the day. So it's not just us here in America, although America seems like it's a little more violent, if you ask me, than Australia. Where was this other one? This is what I was looking for. Back to Rambo was real, and I have to agree with this, and this is why I hesitated when I watched that interview last night. Cara did not look well during the Banfield interview. I hope she gets the help she needs for her drug addiction and this personal loss of her child. Tara, did you happen to see the interview? I don't know.
Briefly, I saw clips of the interview, not the full interview, but I would, my opinion is I would tend to agree that she didn't look well, but, if she has some sort of drug addiction issue, that could be playing into it. But also, she just went through, again, this horrific tragedy. And none of us, I think, had we gone through that sort of situation, would look particularly well or be on top of our game in that situation either.
And this is another concern from Cello Fan. I worry that Ann Taylor could use information she may have gained in representation of Xana's mom to benefit her client, the man who allegedly murdered her daughter. It's horribly distasteful. There might not be a legal conflict per se, according to Dave. But what about this issue?
That would absolutely be a conflict. If you gain, as an attorney, if you gain knowledge from a former client that could be used to the former client's disadvantage, or, you're capitalizing it in some way, that is an issue. And I would be significantly concerned if that was actually occurring here. I don't think that we can jump to that conclusion again. But you can't use information that you gain from a prior client. I mean, that's why we have this thing called attorney-client privilege. If I'm talking to my client, whatever we say is under the cloak of attorney-client privilege. I can't then go and use that information without their permission or share it in some way with another client. So that issue would be problematic.
Dan Hagerman. So there two biggest questions I would say that linger in this case. The first one's the simplest. Why? Why did Bryan do this? We still don't know the answer. The second one I think that comes up most often is this from Don. I feel for DM, but such a mystery. Why in the morning it took so long to phone the police? Even the rumor of removing drugs wouldn't take that long. Tara, I know we discussed this already, but I mean, in due course, as we go to trial, if we do go to trial, do you think this information comes out? Will we eventually know why it was the 8 hours or whatever it was before 911 was called?
Yeah, I think that those are the types of things that will eventually come out. If this case does end up going to trial, the state is going to have to prove their case, right? And the way that they prove their case is they're going to put on their witnesses and their expert witnesses, and they're going to be introducing whatever evidence they have, physical evidence they have through those witnesses. And she is going to be a witness in this case if it goes that far. And I'm sure on cross-examination, that will be one of the questions, why wait that long? Because again, if you're a defense attorney, what are you trying to do? You're trying to find the holes in the state's case, right? And the holes can be biased. It could be, maybe, and I'm not saying that this is true, and I want to be very clear about that, but maybe what you observed, you weren't capable of observing. For instance, maybe you had been drinking, maybe you had been smoking marijuana, maybe you had been doing who knows what. But those are the things that would come out on cross-examination, because then you would be questioning the events that this person perceived. Were you really in the right state of mind to be able to perceive these events that you're now testifying about?
This question comes from Willie99, which is interesting here. I'm former military. United States Marine Corps knife training consists of slashing before the kill stab. Never knew that. I wasn't a Marine. The coroner reported tears more than stabs. Perfect way to mislead. I mean, Tara, this just goes to, I don't want to say cyber salutes, but everyone kind of from their own life experience speculating on this case, right?
Yeah, I mean, it is. We are just guessing at this point in time. We really don't have enough information to jump to conclusions like that. And I know everyone seems to have their own theory of why and who and what, but with those types of evidence and information, that's exactly why you're going to want to bring in an expert, for instance, to talk about what do the slashes look like, what do the wounds look like, what does that mean, and to formulate an opinion or some sort of conclusion to assist the jurors in making a determination as to, whether or not this person committed that crime.
And I'm going to tee up a huge tease here. So this morning, working triple time today because I'm about to do another live, I interviewed Dr. Henry Lee. And if you guys don't know him, you better Google him. He is the probably best known and longest running forensic scientist in the country. There's an institute named after him. He handled the O.J. Simpson case. He was asked to review the JFK assassination after the fact. He worked on the Casey/Kaylee Anthony case and many others. And I did ask him about the stabbing wounds. He obviously doesn't have the photos, crime scene photos to go off of, but by what he has read, he was able to give me a little bit of information. That episode is going to drop next week with Dr. Henry Lee. Google the name if you don't know him. Jared Smith writes, we don't know what state she was in at that time. This is DM now, the surviving victim. B, it's 4 a.m. C, she was probably hoping it was actually a dream when she woke the next morning. All valid points here, right, Tara?
Absolutely. I mean, Jared's absolutely right. I mean, I think all of those things are factual. We don't know what state she was in at that time, what her mental state was. It is early in the morning. And quite frankly, no one expects to wake up and find that type of scene. So certainly valid points there. Marit
writes, there's no conflict of interest here. Will it feel unfair and hurtful for Xana's mother? Yes, understandably. Hopefully someone can explain the procedures of public defense to her. Communication is key. And I mean, the interesting point about that, it's not about your emotions. It's about the law. Dave suggested that there is not a conflict here. I'm looking for another comment or two to wind this sucker up. This is interesting. From Rambo was real again. I don't know the answer to this. How much extra schooling or certification, I guess, Tara, does it take to be a certified death penalty lawyer? Good question, Rambo.
So it's not schooling, but it is a certification process, and that does have an education component to it. So you go through your years of law school, and then after that, and based on certain experience that you have, you go and get some extra courses and education to become death penalty certified. So we're not talking about like in the traditional sense, tack on another 2 years to your law school. Instead of 3 years, it's a 5-year program.
What is this comment here from Heidi Waddell? These students of Idaho must realize this murder was a foreigner to their area. He thought he was smarter than the police, students, professors from this small farm town in his twisted mind. But Tara, again, it goes to show you that the long and strong arm of the law, it is hard to get around. And, one of the things that I take out of this, I'm very pro law enforcement, and this little quote unquote tiny Moscow PD really did a phenomenal job.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that, they had to be careful on how they proceeded with this case. Obviously, additional facts are coming out now that, they had a lead on him and knew about him prior to telling the public that they had their suspect and they had him in mind. I think they played it exactly right. It sounds like it was really a cooperative effort between Moscow PD and agents from, I think, the different FBI field offices. I think that's very wise to have reinforcements in that way, but certainly a good effort by law enforcement and a good result.
And the final question from the future. I love it. From the future. From future. I'm really enjoying these guests. How could you not enjoy Tara? I've seen Tara before, but I hope you'll have Mr. Leroy back again as well. He's fabulous. Tara is becoming a friend of the show. I'm sure you will come back, right, Tara?
Of course, I'm honored to be asked and always have fun on your show. And I think your viewers have some really insightful and great questions. So would love to come back and see you guys again.
Love it. Great answer. Final question to you is your final thoughts. June 26th is a long way off. Do you think this case will be in the news before then?
Oh, yes, most certainly. We are just starting out on this case. I am sure there is much more to come. I think that we are going to see, like I said, some motion practice between now and then. So we'll all have to stay tuned and watch what happens here.
Any would you bet one way or the other that this goes to trial or not?
I've learned long ago to not place bets on that at all. I wouldn't speculate as to, what these attorneys know right now and what Anne knows, what the defense attorneys know about this case. Certainly they're in the best position to evaluate the evidence and evaluate the strengths and weaknesses there. And any decision they're going to make on moving forward to trial is going to be assessing that risk.
See how smart Tara is? She knows not to pigeonhole herself into an answer on that question. She got out of it. Job well done. Couple of quick programming notes. Like I said, I interviewed Dr. Henry Lee. That episode will be out next week. We're doing a live tomorrow at noon Eastern with Phil and Gil, Detective Phil Waters, who has presided over 400 homicide cases. He was a lead investigator on many of those. As well as Jonathan Gillum, who is a Navy SEAL and former FBI special agent. They're going to take your questions on Kohberger and the Alec Murdaugh trial. And tonight, in 47 minutes, I'm going to do another live on the Alec Murdaugh trial. I'm keeping count of how many people are watching this. I better see more people at 9 p.m. Eastern, or at least the equal amount. But for now, love you, America. Thank you.